G'day, folks. AoS Coach here, and we are talking all things Soulblight Gravelords. Wearing my Undertaker hat, I thought that was in respect to our homie Torgilius. But I am joined by the Mortarch of Coursairs. It is Ben Schimmoller, or as I call him, Schimmoller, who has, first off, love Ben. Had a great time in Las Vegas 6 months ago. Been following your journey, and I saw you went 4-1 recently at the Old Town Throwdown, a 4th edition tournament, probably one of the biggest ones we've had so far. So I thought it'd be nice to get under the hood with Soulblight Gravelords, considering how deep of a roster it is. And I know for a lot of people with deep rosters, you get in this analysis paralysis. Do I go skeletons, zombies, doggos? Do I mix them? Who's better? Neferata, Manfred? You know, is Lucavi any good? There's so many options with Soulblight that I wanted to kind of get under the hood a little bit to understand where are they at, because they are doing relatively well competitively. They're not broken good, but they're certainly doing really well. What makes them good, and help you kind of understand from a competitive perspective, you know, where you might want to lean into and maybe get some ideas. But Ben, g'day, welcome. Introduce yourself at your debut. I don't think we've chatted officially on the internet. Welcome.
No, yeah. This is our first time. Thanks so much for having me, Coach. Yeah, Ben Schimmoller, go by Mr. Mortanks, member of the awesome Coursairs Warhammer gaming team for Age of Sigmar. We have a couple 40K players left, I think, somewhere. And I got some custodes gathering dust on a shelf somewhere. But really, AoS is the bomb for sure. We love it so much. And also got to pitch my event coming up mid-September, High Desert Hammerfall, hoping to get that into the circuit more. I know we're a little close to it now, but in the future, we'll bring it back next year. Grateful for Games Workshop hooking us up with a golden ticket. So still time to sign up in Central Oregon. It's in Bend, Oregon, September 14th, 15th. And anyways, I really appreciate all you do for the community, Coach. It's super fun to have you be a guest here, and I appreciate you getting the chance to make the pitch. So, yeah, let's talk Soulblight.
I didn't even know the pitch was coming, but I'm glad you did it. Take advantage while you can.
Right.
Go check out the event. You know, America's got some great events. And send me the link, and I'll pop it in the episode description if I remember. But let's get under the hood with Soulblight. You finished your sales pitch?
Yep, all done. Now we're going to pitch Soulblight.
Done. Let's pitch Soulblight. And by the way, I felt really bad calling you the Mortarch of Coursairs. Originally, I was going to call you the Mortarch of Despair, being my homie Krell. Shout out to Krell, the Chaos Champion, which actually kind of works nicely with you, given you were sharing a little story where your 4-1 wasn't your first major tournament. For 4th edition, you've kind of learnt along the way. And much like Krell was a wonderful champion of chaos, had died, got resurrected as a Mortarch, or eventually became a Mortarch or a Death Lord, and kind of like you. But anyway, Alex G and everyone else who plays Death in the Coursairs, don't get upset with me calling you a Mortarch of Coursairs. But let's talk Soulblight. Where are they at? How are you finding them, and what are you liking so far in 4th edition?
Yeah, you know, I think what I really like about Soulblight is just how diverse the toolkit really is. And you can make Soulblight work for you and work for you in 4th. Now, I think personally they play really different than they did in 3rd. Towards the end of 3rd, I got under the crutch of zombie spam for sure, which was a very point-and-click army to play. But it took a lot of aura management and making trades at the right time. And now more than ever, I think the Soulblight game is about board control through making trades at the right time and taking enemy units off the board in those trades. You really rely on your heavy hitting heroes. I think people have really gravitated towards the Mortarchs, seeing their damage output and buff, debuff, tooling, tech options available to them, and tooling those with the right units around is super critical. You know, one combo that I, at first glance, you know, as many have noticed at first, is the trick of the pile-in combo with Manfred, along with, I was really enjoying it with Graveguard, but there's definitely some tricks to it. And, you know, getting Manfred in, letting his attack go off, giving a buff to the Graveguard, letting them chew stuff up, really had great rewards. But the more I played it, it just wasn't quite how I enjoyed playing. It's great tool, great combo. I like to be a little more kind of catching a little bit when I play Age of Sigmar, and it was kind of hard to figure out how I could have units that could be a good anvil and be defensive. And Neferata, for me, brought that a lot more. With the -1 to hit aura and Dark Mist, that combo on a Brick of Graveguard around her played a lot more into the style I wanted to play, especially when you had the Necromancer for fight twice. I noticed I was trying to do that combo with Manfred, and I was just losing too many Graveguard for the fight twice to really have that much of a payoff afterwards. But if I put a -1 bubble around them and made their save unmodifiable, that was a great toolkit that I figured out worked much better for my style of play. And then you can focus on, your little summonable units, utilizing the tricks of the grave, recycling. Those combos really pay off. And those is one of the great tools that helps them combat the speed of Lumineth and Nighthaunt, which have been, great forces on the tabletop and in the meta. But if you can use that regeneration well and the advantage of the trains and your heroes, especially when you start to recycle stuff mid to late game, that can put a lot of stress for some of those armies that they're not used to fighting unless they're in mirror matches necessarily. And that recycling can keep you in the game sometimes where a lot of other armies would really be feeling the stress mid to late game of not being able to get through and past things like 10 Dawn Riders or, 20 Blade Guys or something.
Yeah, it's always been a really interesting run because death has been, especially Soulblight Gravelords, where you can be matched up, 1-to-1 and you're doing quite well. But then as soon as the regeneration starts happening, and you realize towards like turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, you've now got more bodies, you've still got combat, you've still got plenty of options, and my 10 Dawn Riders or my whatever unit is slowly degrading, and I just don't have the punch to get through you in that late turn or that late game. It can be really tough, and that's the play style that I probably most enjoyed when I played Soulblight and I played, the death armies, because I didn't really like the 60 zombies, and we can't do that. So there's obviously a big change there with some of that. But as I looked through Soulblight Gravelords for 4th edition, correct me if I'm wrong here, you tell me how this is just my perception. I felt like the overall army has gotten better, right? Where, things like the Coven Throne and the Mortis Engine are good choices. Prince Vordry seems like a good choice. That you can still do doggo spam, you can still do skelly spam, you can still do zombie spam, or when I say spam, just build around them.
Right.
You can mix them. You can do zombies and doggos, or doggos and skellies. You could do Orc Cav with Blood Knights and Black Knights. You could do summon all. And it feels like, yes, there's a few strong points across the board, but it feels like the overall, most of the units have kind of gone up in quality, and there's a lot of good options.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think this is one of the best internal balanced indexes I think out there overall. That's really hard to justify looking at any tools as really objectively bad or not justifiable at all. I think there's tweaking and some slightly stronger than others. But if you can find tools that match your play style, that can overcome using someone else's internet list that won a GT. You might perform better with a quote unquote less optimal unit if you understand what you need that unit to do here and there, versus if you just grab someone's list that does well at a GT and try it, and you don't quite understand every way the tools are supposed to be used because you didn't build it yourself. I think that's one thing that's really important. My first tournament I was running them, I did not do that hot because I basically bummed most of the list from Tom Guan, and I didn't, because I just copied and pasted and was deploying. I was like mostly in the 3rd edition mindset of, oh, these units do what they do in 3rd. And that was mostly true, but there's some unique differences. And there was some details in the list where I would have swapped A for B and things like that might have fit my style more. And so when I went to Old Town and had a much better performance, it was much more my list. And that was one of the great feedbacks one of my teammates gave me was like, well, why aren't you playing your Soulblight? And so that was a great way for me to kind of dig into it and really understand, okay, what do I want out of this? And how do I want this to play versus making someone else's list work for me. I think that's a great jumping off point to try something and figure out what tools you like here and there. But, it just comes down to personal play style and what you're comfortable with too, and understanding metas and things like that as well.
And you're 100% right. Like whenever I look at lists, I take inspiration, but I don't copy. And the difference here is that I'm like, okay, cool. This list went 4-1 or 5-0. What made it work? Well, I can see, for example, like I know when I was looking through Stormcast, and I'll use Stormcast as an example. One, because what I'm playing at the moment. Two, it's got a deep roster like you have, right? You start looking at the scene and go, okay, cool. I'm playing with a lot of long strikes. I'm playing with a unit of 2 long strikes. Why are people liking long strikes? Because they have the ability to go into priority target, get +1 hit, +1 to wound. Why is that good? Because it allows me to do this, this, this. Wait a second. This is actually a really powerful combination. If I'm not thinking about this, or I'm really struggling to remove a certain hero, this might be a good option for me. But it doesn't mean like I take the whole list completely and copy it.
Sure.
And I think that's the beautiful thing is that there's been, like one of my homies in Australia, Bob Van Emmerich, who has done a Soulblight Gravelords chat with us in the past. He recently went 5-0 with Soulblight at a 50-player tournament. And his list is different to yours. So I can look at both of them and draw inspiration. And Soulblight has got a lot of great options. I think maybe the only thing I'm not feeling the love for right now is your monsters. And I specifically mean Terrorgeist Zombie Dragon without hero. And to a degree, I don't know if it's just me, but because I don't like the aesthetic, I'll be brutally honest. But Luca Vi and the Vengorian Lord, I just haven't. I look at it and go, I'd rather put my points in Manfred, into Neffy, into Vordry, Vamp Lord, Zombie Dragon. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
No, I don't think I share similar sentiments. I think there needs to be. I mean, personally, and I've had this chat with some of the other folks in the meta. There's a bit of a price premium for sure on some of the heroes in Soulblight. You really are paying a big chunk. I mean, I think one of the most brutal offenses is Radikar the Beast at 350. It's insane to me. I mean, what a great scary model, cool, gorgeous, fun synergies. And you pop in the list and you're like, for 50 more points, I could have a zombie dragon. And then for 80 more points than that, I can just have the prince. And
or 100 points less, I can have a Coven Throne or
exactly.
Or a Palanquin or something. I'm like, I've got too many great choices for those slots. And now that the regiment systems come into play, it's like, I just can't justify you. Sorry, Luca Vi, but I'd rather Neffy. I'd rather Mortis Engine. I'd rather just so many great options, which is partially the analysis paralysis that Soulblight has, is that you've got so many good options. It's like, right, where do I start? And then just stick to it, because otherwise you be veering over forever. And it's not as clear now. It's like, you don't have, like, it was easy in third edition. Legion of Night, Manfred. Legion of Blood, Neferata. Cool. True. So I'm going to do Legion of Blood. I have Neferata. So I'm not going to go Manfred. Cool. Very easy. What then works with Legion of Blood? Boom, 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 boom. It's not so much like that anymore. And we're kind of dancing around the rules. I swear we'll get into the rules very, very, very soon. But it's the context that I want you to start thinking about, folks, is that you can go around in circles. I found that with Stormcast, you go around in circles forever, trying to find the synergies, trying to make it work, and you'll be going around forever. It's stick to that true north, whatever got you into the hobby or that play style, or the models that you absolutely love, or the thing that you really want to like. This is the thing that's going to kill. This is the thing that's going to stay around, and then work around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think understanding your play style, and that can be a really hard thing to understand. Like for me, I tend to really like good, strong anvil catching units with lots of little scalpels that are almost little glass cannon, little knives. They're annoying for opponents to deal with. That was a common play style I would try for a while. Or commonly high pressure with cheap little defensive scoring units. Soulblight really excels at that of, hey, here's a high pressure chunk that you have to deal with. It can be defensive. And meanwhile, while you're dealing with it, got skeletons and bats popping up around, picking you up points. And ideally, you're removing threats. And if your threats get removed, half of them will regenerate. So it's it's a great play style, a great army. You can play aggressive too with speed if you go cavalry heavy, which I think there are builds for. I probably think they're not as optimized just because of price hikes on the heroes, but definitely playable. I would say that as Soulblight players, I would not expect points to move around much for a while. I'm totally speculating on that. I mean, maybe some units go down a touch that they aren't seeing that they hope to see more. Maybe, but the win rate where it is being pretty solid, unless that changes dramatically, I would guess that we probably don't see a lot of movement and shifting on the points for them for now. But I could be totally wrong.
I guess we'll wait and see. Wait and see. And I think it's partially hard as well because you've got things like endless spells, morbid conjuration, for example, exactly. which is elevating certain armies, and it's like maybe it's the Purple Sun and Gravetide as opposed to this particular faction or unit. But one thing I do want to ask you before I bring up the rules is, in your transition to 4th edition, and this is an open question, what are some of the big considerations either that you've learned or you have had to adjust or have really found beneficial to Soulblight? And to kind of put the parameters around, obviously we've had a change in commands, whether it's, new commands or removed. Like, for example, people used to love like Fellbats, for example, because of like Unleash Hell and like being able to tie things up and then charge. Don't need to do that anymore. There's no Unleash Hell. On the flip side, you've got things like Magical Intervention. I can now cast in my enemy's, hero phase, and a lot of things that come out from that. And there's smaller objective sizes. So those 40 zombies are going, or 20 skellies are really going to hold down an objective, and you can't just sneak onto it and not engage. There's so many things. Over to you. How Soulblight, what have you found from 4th edition changes?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones that takes a lot of consideration in play management style is kind of going back to, I think it was the 2nd edition, where it does cost a command point to recycle summonable units. And in a new edition where we have it's so command point hungry, right? Like we were talking about, redeploys, counter charges, magical intervention. I'm so new enough I can't always get the names.
It's fine. We make things up like the finest hour, and it ended up becoming, well, I called it their birthday, but I think Vince was talking best day ever. Like, it's not best day ever, finest hour. Yeah. Like, anyway.
Yep, totally. So all those things eat up your command points. And the first, when I was playing Old Town, I really was very conscious every time I thought about command points of, okay, what am I going to get killed this turn? And do I need a command point to try and recycle something this turn? And if I use it now, what will I not get later, and vice versa? So that's, I think, the first consideration is more than a lot of other armies. We really care about command point management. It's super, super important. It can cost you the game because you're paying points for these units to have abilities, but you need to put that resource into them. And so you're paying those points and not getting it. It just can, it will lose you the game.
I'll plus one of you on that. I've played plenty of Skaven games, which is very similar, where you can recycle units for 1 CP. And the amount of times my opponent got to the end of the battle round or the turn and had no CP left because they did the all-out attack or all-out defense, or like they just did one too many. It's like, you've got to almost like get those 4 CP, put 1 aside you only spend 3. Like, you've always got 1 in the bank right there. You want to do magical intervention, but it's not worth it. Keep that 1 CP.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely. And I think that's one of the important things in 4th edition are units that can don't necessarily need resources put into them to perform well. That is really critical, especially for Soulblight, that can make the difference on what are you asking this unit to do, and do you need to put resources in to do it. And that can change if you're putting them in your general's regiment or not for honor guard purposes, or if you're just accepting that this is going to go here and it'll do what it does, and it's really just here to score points. And finding those trades were super important. So I think that's really one of the biggest ones is the command point management aspect is got to be, to me, the most overwhelming. And then with that, again, understanding this kind of ties into it, but making trades at the right time. I really talked about how important that is in Soulblight, like controlling when your units get deleted changes when they can recycle. And when that occurs, you really want to be thinking about your opponent's abilities. That, you know, a lot of those cheap little summonable units are great for recycling towards the end of the game or whatever, to go snag objectives in your opponent's backfield or whatever. Or if you're recycling on your turn, there's always the temptation, oh, I only have to be more than 3 away, I can toe in on this objective. Well, now your opponent might only have a 4-inch counter charge. And where previously you didn't really have to think about that. Now, I gotta be honest, I could have easily lost my last game at Old Town Throwdown because I put down I was tired, you know, last game, just trying to get it done under the clock. And also playing against an excellent player, John Zozak. I put down my recycled unit to steal the objective away, and they're like 6 inches away from a handful of Dawn Riders that scooted away from a fight earlier. And I just didn't even think about it, right? And I should have been managing how many command points he had left. And thinking about that when they came down, he popped counter charge, which was going to swing. It was going to be like a 6-point swing for like a battle tactic, hold more, and hold 2 or something. And he rolled a 5. If he had rolled a 6, I could have easily, you know, been giving away that many points. Those kinds of basic things to think about of when you're recycling. Am I giving my opponent the opportunity to undo? It's super insulting because you just spent a command point. That's if they kill that unit right away, that's time then they don't have to deal with it on their turn, and you just wasted that one time that unit gets to recycle. So, you know, placing on the recycling matters more than ever, I would say, given the opponent's ability during your turn to react and kill your thing, be it covering fire, counter charge, what have you.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, it's not all negatives because you can actually use that to bait those 2 CP absolutely out of them, right? You only got 4 CP unless you're a underdog or auxiliary. If you can bait someone to spend the counter charge, you've now taken 50% of their CP, especially if you go first in the turn. Then they've got a whole 1.5 turns left with 2 CP left. And assuming they haven't used magical intervention at the start of the hero phase, all of a sudden, when you get to combat, they don't have the all-out attack, all-out defense, or the power through, or whatever it's going to be. So it's a lot of 4D chess here, which I absolutely love. And I think it's where it's interesting hearing your thoughts around how you start. And look, let's bring up the rules because we've danced around your new faction. Obviously, one of the big differences between 3rd and 4th is the way that what used to be called the grave tokens, grave scythe. I was going to say grave tide. I'm like, no, it's not grave. Internally, I was trying to stop saying the grave tide. I'm like, no, it's not a grave tide, but I couldn't find the word. The grave site. So you used to be able to chuck down 4 tokens for grave sites, and it used to be rules: 2 in your home objective, so 2 in your home deployment area, 2 anywhere on the board. Blah 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 blah. It's changed. So it's a little bit like the old Sylvaneth almost, where now you pick, basically you can set up some either Death Rattle or Death Walker units and essentially bring them up around terrain features, which is a little bit different. So you don't have as much flexibility because you used to be able to chuck a whole bunch of things into the site, but now it's only Death Rattle or Dead Walker keywords, and you bring them up wholly within 6 inches of the terrain feature, outside of 9.
But I guess they did add those keywords to the vast majority of things that were previously eligible. So to my knowledge, I think almost everything that used to be able to do it still has it.
Bats?
So I don't.
Bats was summonable. Wasn't it? Wasn't it summonable?
Bats were summonable, but I think they got Deadwalker. Let me triple check that. But I haven't ever put that in the grave. But
all right, you keep talking. I'll have a look. I'll look at the keyword. You're the expert.
I think that either way, I mean, that tool, they are Deadwalker. So I mean, that tool is super great in some ways because so you do lose a ton of the flexibility of the placing those tokens where you want, for sure. There is some upsides with your reach can be really hard to block out now. You might not always get to place them, but like where exactly you want. But it's very hard to block a whole piece of terrain from your opponent using it to recycle. Versus previously, it was not that hard for an opponent to shut down a gravesite. So trying to find that silver lining and thinking about it. Also, what's nice is when you use the Endless Legions rule, when you're recycling, you can either use the terrain piece or the heroes. So you, again, are getting this big recycle opportunity. And, I know there's probably going to be 2 emerging versions, especially in the States, of either using the Games Workshop maps on the missions or using Old Town Throwdown formats, where they had several different maps that are available for each mission. And part of the defender's choice now is picking which map to use. But, that can really lead into strategies of, okay, well, like on this map, on these objectives, the terrain pieces are here and there. And so for the defender, your agency can come back a little bit as a Soulblight player with picking how big and which terrain pieces are going here and there, if you have that level of option, placing or choosing maps. So something to think about, but definitely you lose some of the flexibility with the gravesite token. So now we're just trying to find out, okay, well, how can we maximize this way now?
Yeah, I think just a couple of quick ones is the fact that you've got 8 pieces of terrain now on a traditional map. So you've basically doubled your options and you've got more defensive and offensive. The thing with the maps, which I really love as well for you, is that you now know exactly where, or actually it's probably twofold, right? You know exactly where you can pop out of on each terrain map. So if you want to be aggressive with those death rattle or dead walker units, and you want to plan out that turn 1, you're going low drops, you want to be aggressive, you want to pop things out, you want to have a flying monster of some form kind of go out super aggressive, or your Blood Knights and support that little focus area, you can plan that out. I guess the flip side is your opponent, not that they will think about this, but they can plan out like how they try to zone you out and like, but then the caveat is it's hard to zone out 8 terrain features.
Very hard. And now you've got your opponent disrupting their potential normal battle plan to stop you from doing yours. And if you can achieve that, that's already a huge step towards victory.
Bingo. If they start worrying about trying to zone you out from terrain features and there's 8 of them, you've already got them. You're stretched out. Most armies are low drops, low unit count. So you win either way, right? You win absolutely. Either way. You got plenty of options, or you've psychologically won before the game started. Let's talk a little bit more about the Endless Legions, right? So you've got the ability where a non-unique Death Rattle or Dead Walker unit that started the battle with 2 more models. Once it's destroyed, you can replace it with half the unit strength, either around that terrain features that we talked about, or to your point, the Soulblight Gravelords heroes. Couple of things here I want to kind of understand from you, right? So first off, a lot of Soulblight lists have the tendency to be low hero right now because people are playing the drop game. You want to have as heroes. In the past, you'd roll out 5 or 6 heroes. You'd have as many heroes as you can. You'd have necromancers and white lord and white kings, and you'd have heroes everywhere, vampire lords. But because now each hero is almost essentially going to be a drop, yes, there's the V-Cross retainers. Don't at me about that. But you've got a lot of there's less heroes potentially on the table.
Yeah.
Are you still going low drops? Are you tapping into that V-Cross retainer? Are you not caring at all about drops? And then are there particular units that you are thinking about with the Deathless Legions that have worked better for you?
Yeah, absolutely. These are all great questions. So I really like to sit in that 3-drop window. I found I would prefer obviously to be 2, but I care more about having the tools I like and just accepting, my opponent's probably going to make me go first. And having just a plan every time of, okay, if I go first, I'm doing this. If I'm going second, I'm doing this. And just accepting that reality either way. And I've taken that into account when I build my list and the tools and how I'm going to deploy. And you can usually see when your opponent starts placing units if they're going to make you go first or second, right? Basically, if they're looking to be aggressive, if they're setting up defensively I don't want to be able for those Black Knights to come over and get me. So if they're placing that far back, they're more or less telegraphing you that you're going first. So you'll get you get maybe 1 drop of information out of them too. So you start thinking about then, okay, what's going in the grave, what's going into deployment. And so I've really found, we kind of touched on this earlier, the importance of figuring out when to drop more than 3 away or more than 9 away is super, super important. To me, there's 2 classifications of ways to use the Endless Legions. Am I using it to get one of my damage output units back, be it Graveguard or Black Knights, or am I using it to get a scoring unit back, particularly skeletons or bats? I usually break up my units into, I want these units to do 1 or 2 things with redundancy. And typically, if I'm asking them to do extra things beyond that, the game's either going really well or really bad. So, ideally, you're trying to use the Endless Legion. Like, if I'm recycling 10 Graveguard and it's a 6 objective mission, and there's a flank that I can start putting pressure on the backside, and that might make them break up their castle a little bit and peel off a unit to go back and defend them. I want to be 9 away, try and make a 9-inch charge. If you really can set it up well, what you really want to try and do is, if your opponent has faction terrain, respawn off of that. And if you roll bad for the charge into the terrain piece, try and pile in and catch the thing you wanted to charge anyways off the first go, or charge off a different terrain piece. And then worst case scenario, you're knocking off their terrain piece and buffs. But maybe you might be able to, if you got like an 8-inch charge that terrain piece, pile, boom, you've caught, usually more often than not, the enemy that you wanted to catch anyways. So there's some tricks that you really can pull off with that Unquiet or Endless Legion ability on the damage output. Now, if you're doing the recycling on the 3-inch away, that's, in my opinion, usually done with some of the more cheaper units that are for scoring, like skeletons and bats. The flip side for that now is, like I talked about earlier, if your opponent's right there, you got to be really careful because they can easily countercharge and lift that unit. We didn't really have to think about that as much previously. As long as you avoided situations where your opponent could pile into you, that was usually all you had to think about. A little more complicated now, but if your opponent's sitting at 1 command point, then you just know in your head, okay, they can't do that. So it's really important to make those trades at the right time and think about, too, if you're blowing through your bats or skeletons too early, then you're hoping to recycle them before you've moved threats that your opponent can use to kind of double back. You might want to wait a turn or 2 before recycling those units right away if you can get away with it, or slow bleed it. Or maybe you're not summoning something back on your turn. Maybe you're doing it on your opponent's turn after their movement phase is done. And now you've given them 2 choices of thing. Well, geez, if I don't go back and charge that, now I'm going to give up that objective versus, I would like to charge that and get, kill a thing. And so I've done that to try and protect units like my Black Knights, where I missed a charge. They're sitting out in the open. Okay, well, they're going to come get got, but I placed the unit of skeletons that recycled back there. Opponent realized he'd rather stop me from blocking points, went back and removed the skeletons. Now my Black Knights were safe. So, but you're just making your opponent make choices. And that is one thing I really think Soulblight are great at, is the more times you shove hard choices in your opponent's face, the more opportunities they make the wrong one, and you disrupt the way they might want to play the game. I just think Soulblight does that better than so many other armies, that it can really be advantageous to that disruption playstyle.
Yeah, and it can be hard, especially if you don't have the speed to be able to, protect my backfield because you've got skeletons or things popping up. I got these, combat monster of some type of unit coming in my forefront. I'm trying to get battle tactics like seize a center or take the flanks. You have set up and made an easy take their lands when you want it. There's stealing objectives. Like, there's a lot of 4D chess that can happen with Endless Legions. I think at minimum for the less experience, it's going to reward you for losing a trade piece. So seize the center could be a really good turn 1. 2 units of bats in the center. Should then they charge you and you lose some bats? Okay, cool. I'll pop them over here. Go take their land. As a future battle tactic.
There's 3 great battle tactics. There's take the land. There's take the flanks. There's the Soulblight specific one where it's be outside of 9 inches, wholly within their territory with 2 units that weren't set up this turn. So, you got to time it right, but that's also one of the advantages of recycling something on your turn way off in a corner and, letting it have different times and momentum. for rejuvenating or blocking out your opponent. So there's times I've used it defensively. You know, I was playing against Lumineth, Wind Charger, Kangaroo spam, and that mobility and the free flowing and the shooting can really be frustrating. So one of the ways I was able to kind of keep him honest was popping things off of objectives at the end of his movement phase. And now, well, you could either shoot the unit that was on the objective that then you were hoping to move on to, but now instead you got to double back and go do it over here. And my opponent was skilled enough that he only let me do it one time. And so then he was always very careful afterwards, moving and then shooting and then moving. But it makes your opponent, again, disruption. You're playing the game the way I want you to play it, more so than you having total free run.
Get your opponent to make more choices can equal more mistakes. So the more decisions you make them choose, you know your army better than they do. You'll force a decision, and then it's just what do you capitalize with, and that's where your Blood Knights, your Black Knights, your Mortar's Engine, your Mortarchs, your whatever start coming into play. Love it. Love it. I think we could talk about the Endless Legions, but it's obviously a very critical piece, and I think the key is going to be have that CP always. Like, do not overspend. Literally get yourself a token, put it to the side. Like, I would mark one CP as like the Endless Legion CP. It's like the emergency. Do not break this in case of emergency. Do not use this CP unless it's an absolute emergency.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, another really important one too that we're coming up on is definitely Invocation. And I got to tell you, one of the great combos I've fallen in love with is this rule. In spite of how we talked about Soulblight not seeing as many heroes as it used to, you know, this is one of the counter this. You hinted at this earlier. The Jerichos have the advantage of some of the retainer heroes being able to do this. Torgilius, I mean, that's why he costs an arm and a leg at 180 points. Is if you build around that and you really want to take advantage of those rules, there are great ways to do it. You know, I really like having that threat piece or catching piece combined with a bunch of little scoring pieces that are annoying to deal with, but you have to, otherwise I get a bunch of points. And if you go kill those, then my dangerous units come and get you eventually. Versus, you know, some people want to double down on, you know, I'm really bringing a ton of dogs and a death rattle, and my recursion is just going to grind them out, and my opponent's just not going to have time. And then if you double down on a couple of heroes with this on that Jericho's build, definitely Invocation comes incredibly strong. I really like that ability. You know, it's pretty straightforward, but it combos super, super well with skeletons. I was having my butt saved just because skeletons more or less have this ability by themselves at the end of every turn. And so they're being able to recycle themselves when they're, you know, trying to scoop your opponent's territory and stay there, and they don't send something strong enough to go wipe out that unit. Well, they can recur enough pieces back plus the banner. All of a sudden, boom. You know, nope, you didn't take back that objective, and I was able to stop it and really affect your opponent's points and play styles. And if a hero gets over there too, now you've doubled down on this recursion to where they're not really going anywhere. It's super strong in certain types of builds. Certain builds don't take as well of advantage of it. There can be moments where you really want to pick more than what you're kind of too spread out for, and that's one of the drawbacks of right now. I think the way Soulblight plays without a lot of heroes, it can be hard to really take advantage of that many units. But I think, you know, if you run a dog heavy list, especially, you have to run Belladama, in my opinion, and she really pairs well with this. And then you also would bring Torgilius to maybe be hanging around with your skeletons or something to that effect. So it's a great tool. It can be it can feel frustrating that you're maybe not always getting the most out of it just because of how few heroes there can be sometimes in this list. And sometimes you're really stuck asking those heroes to do some of the heavy lifting, and you might not have Death Rattle or Deadwalker units nearby them while you're doing it. And so that can be frustrating. But, you know, that's one of the few times once you learn how to use it and get the most out of it, I think it's one of the best tools, and I just really believe how strong it does pairing with skeletons. It's just absolutely insane to me with skeletons.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with Deathly Invocation, right? Like if I was going to build around Black Knights, you know, it really then props up the White King on Skeletal Steed, right? I need something to be keeping up with that, with those units, right? It might save me from spending a command point for using rally because I don't need to rally. But on the flip side, I could actually be rallying that hero or the Blood Knights who don't get to use Deathly Invocation. And I'm now getting healing from Deathly Invocation. I'm getting healing from rally. You know, I don't need to get Emerald Life Swarm to get more healing. If I'm looking for those ways to regenerate, or maybe I do rally Emerald Life Swarm and I get Deathly Invocation, and then I go Torgilius as well. So if you really want to lean in, there's plenty of options, but it's a great little piece. But to your point, it's tapping into the Death Rattle or the Dead Walkers. So if you're someone who's building around Blood Knights, then you don't really have to worry about this. So you don't have to worry about that hero that keeps up with them, or maybe you stick to a Mortarch or whatever. It doesn't matter. But rally then becomes important, or if you're trying to heal in combat, you need the Life Swarm as an example.
Absolutely. And
speaking of vampires, there's another rule, which
is pretty cool, I think, actually. Now, I really like the 2d3 mechanic aspect of it, especially really helps the Mortarch vampire characters. It's a great way if you're in a rough spot, you know, you're mid game and maybe, you know, you've asked to do a little heavy lifting on some of those Mortarch units and they finally get the chance to pick up an enemy unit. That healing 2d3 on them can be a huge difference. I mean, if you're fighting a great combo was I really like the zombie dragon with Neff, because Neff can put Dark Mist on that dragon. If that dragon lifts a unit when it's got Dark Mist on it and heals 2d3, and you know, you get 4 or 5 wounds back, and then you're looking at your opponent's turn, you're like, okay, good luck. And you've got 2 command points and they've got to be thinking, is this dragon going to countercharge me? And it's just buffed up. And if I let it countercharge me again, it's going to heal another 2d3 if there's a juicy little simple unit sitting right by it. And all of a sudden, now this dragon's put 43 wounds back on it, and it's running around mid-table or backfield. You know, that can force your opponent to break up and scatter and push away from you, and that can really help you out. Or you do it with Manfred or Neferata. So that tool can be a fun little combat. People underestimate, like, you know, there's a lot of wounds on those characters. I mean, you're paying a premium for them, but, you know, 16, 15, 14, whatever, you know, whichever one has that range, all of a sudden putting, you know, 5 wounds back on that if you've cost 7, you know, that can feel really discouraging if you are just sitting there and you can just see your opponent's shoulders go down a little bit. And again, another time where you're making your opponent react and get off their way of play. So it's not something to overly rely on, but it's a really important trick to remember, and it can make a difference. And sometimes it can influence what you want to charge. You know, if it's the bottom of the turn, you think you're going to roll for priority soon, you already had priority. You know, your opponent is behind on points. They might not want to take a double, because if they take a double, they might not have good things to kill. Or if you can heal up that dragon enough, they're not going to feel confident in killing it. It's not worth taking a double to not kill a dragon and not get a battle tactic. You can sometimes almost guarantee that you'll get the next priority, whoever wins that roll. So go kill that little unit instead of the big threat right in front of it, heal again, and now you're staring them down being like, come get me. So that was a super powerful combo. I found that it's kind of underappreciated, I think, and can really catch opponents off guard, especially then you double team it with the rally. I mean, you can take a hero back from almost dead to almost fresh.
And there's one more double team we haven't talked about just yet. It actually leads perfectly into the next page, which is, oh no, wrong one. No, not yet. Vol Transference. Vol Transference is another one, right? So your Vlozda, for example, or Vordry or whatever, they can use Vol Transference to get another D3 as well in the hero phase. So all of a sudden, it does bring that tanky. And again, this is partially why the Terrorgeist or the zombie dragon without a mount, it becomes less of an option. It's like
significantly less appealing.
I'd rather find the extra points and get a vampire on top. Then I tap into the hunger. Then I get an extra spellcaster who gives me access to endless spells and gives me another ability to run around with Deathly Invocation. I'd rather take the drop hit and have an extra regiment to get more. I just rather
absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. That's just in my personal experience, anyways.
Yeah, I think there needs to be more rules or some type of thing like around to recreate basically Avangori. Like there needs to be a better Avangori type build if they want monster build. I need an Avangori plus.
Yes.
But anyway, speaking of builds, you've got 4 options. Maybe like are 4 of these all viable in your opinion? One standing out stronger than others right now? I mean, there's some good options, right? You know, Backnall of Blood.
I think there's an argument to be made on all of them, depending on build. In my opinion, there's a clear winner. Especially to me, the Aristocracy of the Night, the +1 casting on Vampire, at least, and the damage output is so strong. And you're going to be relying on a lot of your builds, or at least my builds, where my vampire heroes on Mortarchs, you know, the Zombie Dragon, Radikar the Beast, what have you, for that damage output. And they're all wizards too. And also, that ability also helps Blood Knights in combat when they charge. So if you want to run Blood Knights. And I just think that really adds a lot of roles where, especially in this edition, spell casting is so powerful, you know, and it negates the effect of counterspelling on your opponent's turn by being a +1 negates the -1, and that can really help when you're trying to get defensive endless spells out or just block the middle with them. I think Soulblight have some of the best spells in the game. Neferata's Dark Mist is incredibly powerful and good. It can make unappealing units much more appealing to me in the game and certain builds, and having that +1 to cast can make all the difference. And you know, I mean, I could just go on and on. I just really, or if you're going a dog heavy list, there's some seemingly really appealing ones here with Death Stench. I actually think that's a trap because, in my opinion, to get the most out of a dog build, you need Belladama. And Belladama really, really needs to cast under a Killing Moon to really maximize that list, because I've played that list without it, and it didn't really matter how much damage my D3 mortals with the dogs were doing. They didn't have the scoring power on objectives, and that was incredibly frustrating. Under the Killing Moon removes the beast keyword for scoring purposes. Boom, all of a sudden now 10 unit of dogs actually has a scoring presence of 10. You know, I just think that's a really important aspect to how they play. So I think all of them are justifiable, but in my mind, Aristocracy of the Night's just a clear winner for the importance of Magic right now and how many good spells that the Soulblight have access. I mean, giving out Last Strike. My gosh, what an insane spell. The fact that that's just a spell that all Soulblight characters have, just go boom, strike last. That's huge. I mean, that can win you the game. And when you add that with the other relic ability they have with their artifacts to give out another strike last once per game to an opponent, boy, that can just really seal the deal sometimes. So, you know, I think there's arguments to be made about the other 3, but I just value that +1.
All right, I'm going to rank them, and I want to see if you agree or disagree. So I agree with you. What you just said, Backnall of Blood, the +1. It's too early in the morning for me, folks.
Yeah.
Aristocracy of the Night is number 1, in my opinion. Number 2 depends on my build. I prefer the Death Rattle build. I've always been a skeleton kind of guy. Old Legion of Night player who built around skellies. So whether it's Black Knights, Skeletons, Graveguard, for me, Death March is probably number 2. Number 3 is probably Legion of Shaiish with the +1 to the Deathly Invocation. Though if I was doing more zombies and more doggos, that probably would be around equal. But I think Death March and Legion are probably neck and neck depending on who you and what you're building around. And then probably Death Stench is probably the one that I least like. It's just, it does, at least for me, it's the play style and the units that I would build. Probably too restrictive. I'm not someone who builds a lot around Death Walkers, but if you were just doing all dogs all zombies, then clearly that stands up. But
it does. But here's the problem with it still, in my opinion. It's the only one where you don't have a, I mean, I guess you have a guaranteed pile in, but your damage output is still dependent. So, you know, you're kind of getting pile-ins are nice here and there, but if you're running dog spam, you have the beast keyword. You're not helping yourself on scoring ever, unless you get Killing Moon off, which again, I already talked about why I think another one's better for that. And you might not get your damage buff off. Versus if you have Deathly Invocation bonuses, I think that's stronger. Or if you're casting magic's better, I think that still is better in a lot of dog builds or zombie builds. And you know, I think your ranking is spot on. I totally agree.
I think for me, it's also the conditional piece that we haven't talked about, right? So it's a D3 on a 2-up. So realistically, it's a 3-up on a D6. So you've got a 2 in 3 chance of getting it off. And for that reward, I'm getting up to 3 mortal wounds. So, I mean, like that could be better. No, like if you trigger that all 3 times, right?
Sure,
again, like at max potential, where you do the 3 friendly units and they make the pile in, they do the damage, that could be 9 mortal wounds if all the stars align. Sure. But it's so conditional compared to just getting a +1 to cast or +1 to wound. That's just always on. Or 1 extra Deathly Invocation. It's like, that's always on. I don't need to hit conditions. I don't need to roll a dice. It just happens. For
and I
me,
do think
I value that more.
The few drawbacks of this book is there's just enough little things that are conditional. I don't need one more thing being conditional. You know, there's some abilities and stuff that we might talk about later that it's enough. Some of my teammates will tell you I'm fantastically lucky at being unlucky on dice rolls and inconsistent with them. And Alex Gonzalez blames it on the way I roll the dice, which he might be right at this point. But it just is one of those things, right? Removing variance creates removing opportunities of failure. So
yeah. For me, it's I want to remove as much of those failure points. As a destruction player, I understand the swings. I want to be able to get some more consistency across the board, especially if it's my faction ability. If that's the one choice I get, I want it consistent as possible.
Yep.
Of the 3 heroic traits, now I might get you ranked 1st, 2nd, and 3rd just for speed and simplicity, given that a lot of armies as well are building around War Masters, and you know there's a lot of unique heroes, right? Especially we name them, like all of those Viercross heroes are all named. You've got so few heroes that are not named. You may not even choose a heroic trait. Oh, sorry, you might. You probably get a necromancer at minimum or something. Yeah. But of the 3, what stand out for you?
Yeah, if you're doing an unnamed, if you're doing a non-zombie dragon build, I think easily Unbending Will to me. You're putting, and it's almost certainly going to be a necromancer, and he's almost certainly going to be rolling around with a bunch of Graveguard or something like that to give the bonus fight twice potentially. Adding that extra recursion just makes it that much stronger. Or if you're doing a build with dog spam, this helps counter the effects of beast a lot, of where you can add that debuff on top of it, where you know they're counting as one model and then you add that D6. That can make or break for that unit. And this Unbending Will combo with that might make the Mortal Wound pile-in enough for me to be a discussion, but it's just enough of a stretch combo. I just don't see it used that much. Lash, you know, I tried to use Lash a little bit at first, and I just didn't like it. Didn't pan out for me. So I would say number 1 would be Unbending Will, unless you got a Zombie Dragon. Then I just really like reroll charges on him. It's just one less time you might need a command point, and we want to save those command points for recycling our units.
Yeah, especially, yeah. Oh, and you'd get around counter charge, right? Like if you fail a counter charge, you'd be able to re-roll that charge because it's not a command.
No, but it is in your charge phase. It does specify.
Oh, yes, yes. I should read the screen when
I keep
talking.
Because I got very excited the first time I read it too. and almost made the same mistake till my opponent made sure that they were reading it correctly.
You can tell that I failed many counter charges. So any way that I can find a way around that, yes. And then I read it. It says you can re-roll charge rolls for this unit in your charge phase. Like, okay. Either way, I think Unbending World, Unhinged, Rampager are probably equal, depending on if you're taking a Vloster or no. Lash of the Sire doesn't sing to me. It does not spark joy. But I'm sure it'll help some people, and it gives you some tools, right? On a 2-up, which is much more achievable on a D6. They can move 6, which is not bad. Actually, that's quite good. If they're in combat, they can make a pile in, which is okay. It's okay.
Yeah,
I do like.
Has some use for helping with turn 1 battle tactics, I think, on some of those deployments, whether or not you do edges or seize the center. There could be some merit to it. It could be great for if you think your opponent's going to go first and try and seize the center. It could help you counter that a little more. So there's some merit to it. I know Tom Guan, won the U.S. Open using it at the beginning of the edition up in Seattle. I just think that Tom really values movement as the most important part of the game, and his results obviously speak for themselves. But I've found that there's enough other movement tools for Soulblight that I get more out of the other tools, the other heroic traits.
Guess it depends on, again, what you're building around. If you're building around Black Knights and Blood Knights, Black Knights, Blood Knights, some type of fast movement. Do you need more movement? I'll leave that up to you. But maybe it's a great way where, someone like Tom, for example, who loves things like, zombies or skeletons, getting that extra D6, especially if you roll decently, can actually be really good. Or you can actually bring things back into your bubbles, right? You've overextended and you're out of range. Boom, that gets you now back into range. So it does give you some choices. But I think for me, I'm kind of talking myself into it now. Because I do really value movement, and every episode I always say that movement is one of the most critical things in the game.
Yeah,
I'm now going to walk myself back. I kind of do. I'm torn. I'm actually torn.
I don't think there's a bad choice. I just think it's very build dependent. It's maybe how I'd phrase it, and style dependent.
It's more forgiving too, because like Unbending Will is Death Rattle and Deadwalkers. But if I'm doing Blood Knights, for example, I can benefit from Lash. So. Interesting.
It does force you. The downside of Lash is you've got to have that hero in combat range, and so I think there's certain builds where you can get that. You might. I'm throwing my Black Knights up because they're going to make me go first, and they weren't counting on me getting an extra D6 inch of movement, and now I can make the charge. Cool. Probably unlikely the Black Knights will ever benefit from it again. Right. And so what do you have nearby it again? And
unless you have something like the Vlozda, right? Like you got your Vampire Lords supporting them.
Sure, you can put it on.
But then that asks the question, am I better off with the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon with Lash or Unhinge? And I'd probably argue Unhinge is more valuable. So I guess this is where it's like it gets tough. But then again, if you go put it on a Skeletal Steed White King, then Lash actually works really well.
I think, again, I said this earlier, I think this is one of the best internal balanced on indexes out there. I just really do. I mean, and there's justifications that can be made for different styles and builds all over. And if you can put the tools in there to see the success you want.
All right, I'm not going to sit on the fence. This is how I'm going to rank them: Unhinged Rampager, Lash of the Sire, and then Unbending Will. That's how I'm going to rank them. But it's not a bad choice. That's how I'd rank them.
That's good. I like that.
But I don't think it's too hard choice.
It is.
I think this is a lot easier. So you've got 3 artifacts. I
think this one's super easy.
This is a lot easier. So you've got Orb of Enchantment, Shard of Night, and then Amulet of Screens. How'd you rank them? First, second, third?
Yeah. To me, number 1 is just Orb of Enhancement, and it kind of doesn't matter as much after that. Maybe, I guess, Amulet and then the Shard. But that's, the Shard... If your meta is super shooty, the Shard can be easily more justified. And, if you're in a Lumineth heavy area, Shard can be really appealing. But again, what are you putting it on? If you're putting, is your list only necromancers? Because you're not going to put Shard of Night on Neff or Manfred or something. So, you might be better off having the Orb of Enhancement buried in the back. So when your character gets to charge, they can block lightning reflexes by making, the hero strike last and stuff like that. I just think there's a clear winner here. It's not as complicated as the other ones. There's, arguments to be made as usual about tools you might personally like, but I think Shard gets the best on a zombie dragon, but there's still just better builds that you make that not as necessary. So Orb, I'm just gotta go Orb overall for sure.
I think Amulet's closer to Orb than we realize, because there's a lot of, and this is probably a meta dependent pick. If you are in a meta where you have a lot of high casters, like big,
Sure.
10 wound health heroes, then I think Orb is the right place. But if you're in a meta where there's a lot of small heroes, those 5-6 wound idiot wizards casting spells, and on a 2-up, you can do a bunch of mortal wounds to them, they're going to think twice before they declare a spell or a prayer. No, just a spell.
Just
within 18, right? Because 18 is not that hard to get into. And if they're going for that endless spell and they've got that, I don't know, Kronspine or a Purple Sun, and that damage then kills them, that endless spell disappears as well.
True.
Or it might make them think twice about casting that spell. So it makes you, I guess, it gives me a lot of options. So I think Orb and Amulet are the two picks for me. It depends on what is settling in the meta right now.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. Amulet, I would say I've seen enough builds centered around Teclis or Krondys or even some Nagash that it does bring it down. Or slaves are still bringing Bellicors all the time. And there's enough big heroes that I do think it loses its strength. We'll see if points shift on those enough that discourages those.
I agree, by the way. At the moment, people are playing the drop games. They want to reduce their drops. How do you do that? You get these big supercasters, these big heroes, because they've also got more flexible regiments.
Yep.
So people are building into bigger heroes. They're not running around with those 3 or 4 small wizards anymore, because it's too hard to fit them into a regiment and no one wants to be 4 or 5 drops. If that ever changed, or if you go into a world like Nighthaunt, for example, which is true right now, then Amulet. But I agree with you. Right now, I think Orb is good, but Amulet is not far off.
Yeah, there's opportunities for Amulet, I think, in the near future, depending on how Games Workshop wants us to shift in the game.
Shards is also a meta dependent pick, but just know that this would be a good one if I could get a second enhancement somehow. If there was a way to Warlord,
sure.
Like I'd have it, but because there's so many games where there's not a lot of shooting. I don't know, a Khorne army, for example. Most Nighthaunt armies, like, okay, great. My one and only artifact is useless.
Another mirror match against Soulblight. There's certain builds, all over. I mean, Slaves to Darkness, not a lot of shooting. So it's nice against Order and I guess some, troll builds. But again, I think if you're really worried about shooting, you're probably better off just bringing Neferata and using that Darkness spell combined with a -1 to hit combo can be quite good.
Yeah. If there's a way you get it, one little necromancer behind the scenes, guarded hero, yada yada yada. Second artifact for me, no problem. Now spell choices again. I mean, all three are
great choices.
Little harder though. Like when you compare them to some of the other factions, and maybe it's that heroic trait that gives us the plus. So no heroic trait. The battle formation that gives us +1 to casting is probably factored in, because there's a lot of like 6s in other factions. You're flat 7, so
flat 7 across the board. Utilizing deployment with places of power, super important to try and combo that, especially if you don't take the +1 to cast battle trait. I really love these. The other kind of counter build on them a little bit is the better 2 are definitely shorter range. And so they lend themselves to more aggressive builds or more aggressive units. I just think overwhelmingly Prison of Grief is just unreasonable. Strike Last, giving that out is so incredibly good. especially if you can do it twice in a turn with the Orb of Enhancement. Incredibly strong combo there. It can shut down and interrupt the ability of how Lumineth want to play. Can give you a chance to get the damage you need to diminish trolls before they smash you apart. Can really mess up Night Haunt if a brick of Hex Wraiths or Blade Geists are coming into you. There's just all sorts of things. Varangard gives you a chance to lift a few of those Nurgle Varangard to take the edge off. That might be the difference between living and dying. And if you double activate with the Necromancer or Black Knight or Graveguard combo with double Strike Last, well, if it's Strike Last and it's my turn, I get to have my Strike Last go before your Strike Last. So that can be, again, double swinging Graveguard or double swinging charging Black Knights. It's always a good time before your opponent ever gets to swing. Waste Away can be another good option, too, to really shore up if you want to go into something nasty. It's a good second, in my opinion, especially if you're running into like trolls. Trolls are just so good right now, I think, and can be one of those brawling armies that Soulblight doesn't really love to get in a grind with. Can really mess them up. Not as helpful against some builds like Night Haunt that are prevalent right now, but the flip side is if you're running into enemy cavalry and they're going to be charging into you, counterspelling with that spell can really maybe make the difference between you living and dying when a brick of cavalry comes slamming into you in, a phase later. So I think those are really good options. Biotransference is, kind of, again, one of those things we talked about earlier. It's nice because it's longer range, and that can really help. And again, it can be one of those things where you do a little chip damage and heal up your character, which can be a big difference on, again, healing up those big things enough that they just don't go away. It can be really frustrating for your opponent to deal with. That I think you're going to see mid-game Prison and Waste Away get cast a bunch. In early game, Soulblight mostly focusing on getting endless spells out just because of the range impact. And so that really picking and controlling where the fights happen between your movement, Orb of Enhancement, Prison of Grief can, while funneling things in with the Sun and Gravetide or Shackles to slow something down so you can catch it is mostly what you'll see. Biotransference you're casting because that's the only thing you're in range of, and most of your endless spells are out, or you fail to cast them, and you're kind of just throwing that at the wall. The other thing is some of the War Scroll spells. Neferata's War Scroll spell is incredibly strong too. So. Oh,
really? I hadn't noticed. I swear you've mentioned it like a million times in the last hour.
I love that spell so much. Not you. I hate rolling dice. I'm so bad at rolling dice. Anytime you can make the save modified or not modified is so critical. And you can throw it on tons of great stuff. So all around, and then you add Nagash, which I see.
No. I brought Nagash because this is the time where I would ask you about some of your favorite units. And first off, I want to ask because one of the Discord members had asked me, so please ask. So Blitz, here's your question. Where is Nagash placed in Soulblight Gravelords? Is he good or bad? And then we start bringing up, like we've talked about Manfred, we've talked Neferata. Then I want to start knowing a little bit more about some of your other favorite units.
Yeah.
But while we're talking, let's transition spells over into Nagy.
So Nagash,
how's he fare in Soulblight?
I think not too shabby, and the reason why it's not too shabby is, I think there's one specific build that can work with him, because really to get the most out of that premium cost on Nagash is getting that recycling out of him. We've seen this with OBR, him recycling a brick of 4 Harbingers, or not the Morghast.
Your Morghast or your Mortis Guard. And like
Mortis Guard, right? A brick of 6, a Mortis Guard, or 4 Morghast. It is so disheartening to watch, that come back on the table after you've lifted it one time and you've dumped tons of resources into it. So you pay a premium for Nagash. I think it kind of forced you to list build. I really liked Adam's lists that did very well. He didn't do quite as strong as at Old Town, but he took it to US Open in 8 rounds and did quite well with it. It was Nagash, the Prince, 10 Blood Knights, and I think he rounded it out with a couple bats. And that army will just punch you in the throat. And Nagash buffing and doing damage and getting your endless spells out reliably, combined with the Blood Knight slamming into you while you're dealing with the Prince, is a lot to ask for most armies. And especially once you finally lift those Blood Knights, all of a sudden, oh, here they come again. That's really, really strong. It's very elite and very forgiving. It's tough in a tournament with 6 objectives. You're kind of forced to just, or
if you play Scorched Earth.
Yeah. You're really forced to control tempo that whole game. Like, you have to put your foot on the gas and just shove it in. It'll play, I don't know, kind of like the tempo dictation of Old Pigs, right? Like, not that it plays the same way, but just that you have to be aggressive.
I think you're playing Suns. I think this is Death's version of Suns, right? You've got these big tar pits of like lots of points, and you've got these 3 or 4 concentrations of wounds and attacks. But anyone that has played Suns, partially you just avoid them. If you can score your battle tactics and get onto an objectives, then I mean, some missions where there's only 3 or 4 objectives, that's really hard, and you will dominate. But as a Suns player, I can't go 4 Mega Gargants all the time because there are those 6 and 8 objectives where I just can't compete. So that's where I need the little babies.
That's the help, I think, of the brick of 10 Blood Knights. The beginning of 3rd, I was doing a build with them where it was focused on giving them Dark Mist, pinning them into the opponent, putting Neff behind them, doing that -1 to hit bubble and be like, you're stuck grinding it out on this. And, you know, unless you've got crazy mortal wound spam, it's going to be hard for you to chew through this. And I think you can probably do that again with this build. And especially now that you have battle command traits like Power Through, you could slam right through them into that backfield and pick up a bunch of buff pieces that can be critical for certain builds and armies and delete those off the top, or cause mortal wounds or get in touch and cause that disruption, tag a bunch of things so that they are taking mortal wounds when they fall back, if they fall back at all, while then, you know, you can do mop up with other things. And I mean, you know, Nagash is scary if any heroes want to come out and play. Like, what, you know, Hand of Dust is not to be forgotten about. That can just right away something really potentially scary. So it's got some, like, I would say that's probably how you have to play Nagash. I think there might be some conventional wisdom that says, oh, I got to take a bunch of cheap things now to get in the way. But I actually think you're missing out on half of what you're paying for if you do it that way. Because, like, who cares if you bring 10 dogs back again? Like, you're just going to get so much more out of a bigger brick of something like that.
So if I summarize, maybe Nagash playable, absolutely. Do you get the most of Nagash in Soulblight? Probably not. Certainly not compared to some of the other death factions, but it's not a bad choice. If you take Nagash, it's not a bad choice, but how you win your games and your battle tactics and your victory points, how do you do this is up for debate. Now, partially, you probably could just go you could do still the 10 Blood Knights and then fill the rest with just chaff and getting things like that. That's absolutely an option. Or you could just go all in, as you mentioned, Prince Vordry, Blood Knights, and literally just 3 big power castles. But do you get the most out of it in Soulblight? Probably not.
Yeah.
It probably leads us to, if you're going to spend like 900 points, you've got a lot of good options, right? You could do Manfred and Neferata or Prince Vordry as like a tag team. You've got so many great options that maybe I probably would rather spend the 900 points on two really good heroes than one ultra hero.
I couldn't agree more. To me, especially if you're doing a combo of things, I'm a big believer in Neff should be one of them. I'm not beating this to death, but just Neff stocks through the roof.
Let me find Neferata. Let's move to Neferata because Neffy is good. Do you take Neffy and Manny? Do you take one or the other? Let's talk Neffy first. Like, what does Neferata bring to the table? And you've talked a lot about Dark Mist. Tell me more. Tell me more, not necessarily about Dark Mist, but talk about Neferata and the playstyle that she brings.
The crux of Soulblight is you're paying so much of a premium for these big heroes And so much of maximizing your other units is having your heroes around to do the spells, to do the recursion, to do the damage output, what have you. Neferata, more than any of the other heroes, gives you resources to keep those heroes around. And any good opponent worth their salt is going to high priority target your heroes in Soulblight. And there are certain armies that will be able to do that no matter how you set up and deploy. Nighthaunt will reach you. Shooty Lumineth will reach you. Certain city shooty builds will reach you. Potentially, mid-game, if they're really patient and waiting, cavalry heavy, slaves to darkness can do it too. So you need those resources to protect your resources. And she's got the two rules of the passive Twilight's Allure and Dark Mist are those things that protect what you've paid almost half your points on. And there's just nothing else in Soulblight that gives you that much of a return. So, and it frees up, again, like I talked about, heroic traits and opportunities like that. When then you combine that with an orb of enhancement of, hey, my save's unmodified. Hey, you're striking last. Hey, I also cast Vile Transference. Those tools protect your resources while giving you the most time to threaten your opponents. I just think that's so important with these kinds of builds. And she's got a couple of great little damage output tricks. I mean, she can auto-remove enemy heroes potentially on a 5+ if she inflicts damage with her weapon profile that's going to have the most attacks. And if we're putting her into the correct My Favorite Battle trait that gets +1, she's +1 to wound now. So she's got 5 attacks on 3s, wound 2, rend 2, damage 1, anti-heroes, another rend 1. You put the sun by there, now you got 5 attacks that are potentially up to rend 4, wounding on 2s. You're going to chip away at stuff in a very frustrating fashion for your opponent. And then you can bink a 5 up and something's gone. So not something you rely on, but can be game-changing if it occurs, right? It's just one more little tool that's in your back pocket, and it makes your opponent think about it. Sometimes you like to play a little mind games with your opponent where if they're getting ready to charge things like, don't forget on a 5-up, she can remove a hero from play. And just
only
also your opponent can be like,
only sometimes.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Psychological warfare, my friend.
Yeah, that's right.
A couple of other things I'll add if you don't mind.
Please.
Twilight's Allure, one rule that I really love about that, and we talked a lot about the CP resources, right? And, countercharge, shouldn't I countercharge, forcing your opponent to make a hard decision. Subtract 1 to hit for combat within that 6-inch aura. All of a sudden as well, do I spend a CP all-out attack just to get back to neutral? Do I accept the -1 penalty? Now I'm hitting on 4s or 5s, and now there's less damage coming into me. And then you've got the Mortarch of Blood with the 3 Death Rattle or Death Walker units moving. That gives you a really easy Caesar Center. That gives you a really easy take the flanks. And all of a sudden, that now gives you so much mobility, especially for the non-cavalry builds.
Yep.
That it's just that flexibility, in addition to Dark Mist, in addition to what you've just talked about, makes her a really viable choice, and why it's hard for me to justify a Nagash versus this plus another superhero.
Yep. And again, she can be using those. She always gets Twilight's Allure on herself because she's always within 6 inches of herself. And she can be giving it to something else too, combined with Dark Mist again on herself, unit of Blood Knights, unit of Graveguard, on Manfred, on the Prince, on what have you. So I would say she lands there. And so then, to me,
is she auto pick though? Like if I was building a Soulblight list today, is she always like STR?
For me, almost always. I would have to be deliberately building a very different style of play, more so to try something different, and it'd be more for my style of play. She's not auto-take, and if I'm going in there to try and win the tournament, that's how I play. I want that resource. For me, yeah, overwhelmingly.
All right, I want to compare her now to your alternative Mortarch, that being Manfred, right? So because both Manfred and Neferata are tech pieces. They are not go and charge in and smash. They're not Vampire Lord or Prince Vordry. They are go in and kill, kill, kill. These are utility pieces that bring a lot of versatility across the game, but they are not going to bring down a Mega Gargant in a combat. They're not your hammer.
Nope.
So do you see a world where Manfred and Neferata are running the same list?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or are they both the quarterback in the roster, and you still need that, I don't know, line breaker, or I'm going to use some Blood Bowl terms and show that I don't really know NFL.
It was pretty good. Linebacker, fullback. I think there's justifications for either. I really like Manfred a lot. I think Manfred helps you get the most out of Death Rattle units, especially. Because the Death Rattle are so much more damage dealers than Deadwalker units. And so we're looking at his passive, the Sword of Unholy Power, is a great, great, powerful combo that he can do rolling with Graveguard. I really love, as you said perfectly, these are both tech pieces. I really like, when I've played with both of them, keeping a brick of Graveguard by them that they can both benefit and buff and use. And that can kind of be the hammer piece they need to then finish off something themselves, or vice versa. And I usually, just because I like dumping more eggs into a basket, apparently, a Necromancer too, to try and buff up the Graveguard to fight more than once. But all of those tools together, Manfred really is something to not sniff at, right? His spell is a great little damage tool for sure that can be chipping away. Again, don't love it as much. It loses a lot. It's for me compared to Dark Mist, but I would say, we've got his strike first ability. Here's another bummer about it. It's not a guarantee. I would like Manfred so much more if this was a 2-up even, but you're paying a premium for an ability that doesn't always go off. And that can be frustrating for sure when you're going to use him in moments where you want him to strike first, and then, your Deadwalker units get a buff. And, just the fact that cannot be always a reliable setup can be frustrating. Now, his great ability, I think that makes him creme de la creme, is the Mortarch of Night with the redeploy, especially with that Graveguard combo. Super, super powerful. Or he can use it on himself. And, reminding people that redeploying into combat is not the same as charging into combat. Redeploying within 3 inches of an enemy means they're locked in combat. So versus charging, you have to finish within that half inch. All you have to do is clip engagement range. So maximizing that redeploy is really, really powerful, be it with your Graveguard or Manfred or some other unit that you want to use it on. I think you're more likely not going to ever want to use it on Black Knights, because you want Black Knights charging, because that's when they get buffed up. Or Blood Knight, right? Or Blood Knights can't use it, but Black Knights. And, if you're redeploying dogs or Deadwalker units, which are bats or zombies as well, they just don't have the damage output. So giving them +1 attack, kind of forgettable. Not really that helpful. There's a chain of sequencing you can do with Manfred and Belladama on Deadwalker direwolves, where Killing Moon gives them +1 rend. You start to see a conversation there about a value. Again, I just think Graveguard is just so much better for the damage output, and for literally only 10 points more than dogs. For me, Manfred is a better tech piece at helping me fight and control fights, or blocking your opponent if they get a little too bold, placing cavalry forward to pile into them so that they're not buffed on the charge anymore and getting damage bonuses. Those things, or anything that gets buffed on charging, that can be a really frustrating tool for them. Or piling in, or redeploying onto an objective and getting into combat, so then you get a pile in as well. Hey, now you're not spending 2 command points on countercharge. That's super important ability as well. So
plus you can avoid cover fire. So if you're up against a shooting army, it's happening in the movement phase before shooting, right? So you can tie something up before cover fire. So in my opinion, I'm going Neferata right now. As much as I love Manfred, I'm a Legion Knight person. Manfred has won me many awards and stuff. Love Manny. Right now, I'm probably a Neferata person because of utility, but I definitely see a playstyle and a build
Absolutely.
where Manfred leads it. I personally don't like the idea of both Mortarchs, just because then where does a punch come from? I think it's where Vordry or, as you've said, Blood Knights, where is the punch coming from? But
I do.
I also can see. I can also see them both working really well. It's just then who gives you the punch?
Yeah,
because both of those take up 900. This takes up 900 together.
I think you're forced to bring a unit like Black Knights and be very, very careful with them. Bait your opponent in with your defensive tech. Count on yourself catching with Neferata's defensive abilities. Once they're stuck grinding against 20 Graveguard and Neferata, you pin them around and slam 10 Black Knights into them. That would be how I think you have to do it. Doesn't mean it's always a great choice, and there's plenty of combos that wouldn't care about that. So I think it's doable, but I agree. I think that there's better choices.
If they were around the 350 mark and combined with 700 points, I think I'd definitely do both. When they're around the 900 mark together, I find that too hard to justify. But
yeah, even if it came down to more of like 800 points, even there's a much better conversation.
Speaking of conversation, give me another couple of units. Maybe we'll go a little bit faster because I
do want for sure. We can go
no. Like I'm loving this conversation. I know some people be like, get to this unit, and unfortunately, we can't get into every unit. But at the same time, for something like this, which is a really critical decision of these key heroes, and a lot of us are building around Neferata, Manfred, Vordry. There's to get one of these conversations. They're going to want this detail. So I love this conversation. I just know that we've got a lot of war scrolls that we can touch on. We'll be here forever.
Yeah. So I think I'll skip the Prince. The Prince is very self-explanatory. He's fantastic. He's going to smash through a lot of stuff. I want to go to the Zombie Dragon maybe instead, because to me, the Prince is pretty self-explanatory. And I just want to talk about the situationalness of what makes the Zombie Dragon appealing.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask you that question in Vordry mode. I'm like, cool. When do I take Vordry versus when do I take? We got to come back to you, my friend, Torgilius.
Yes, I definitely got to talk about Torgilius.
He's so good. Where is his Vampire Lord? Keep talking.
Yeah.
I'll
the
find
Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon utility really comes. He's very playable to me with Neff. If you're not bringing Neff and you want to bring the Manfred route, really not worth. It's a lot harder to justify, in my opinion. The appealing part about the Zombie Dragon over the Prince, you might argue, for a hammer unit is, A, you're saving 80 points. That could be, the bats are 90, and an 80-point difference might let you squeak in that one extra bat unit that is helping you out with battle tactics, more recycling opportunities, things like that. So that's something I think that shouldn't be overlooked. On top of that, there's the heroic traits and relics that go on with the Orb of Enhancement and reroll charging. That can't go on the Prince. If you can put that on the Zombie Dragon, you've put something into, never needing a command point reroll for charging. So that's what I just wanted to throw out about him. I think it adds a lot of tools to the table. 16 wounds is a lot. Again, the damage, not as reliable as the Prince, but something I think to be said about for sure. So anyways,
I still like the Prince mostly because of Quick Blood, the spell, getting the strike first.
Yes.
The snapping jaw for up mortal wounds. I think, and then the Saint of Slaughter. I'm just like like, unless I've got a really cool build where I can tap into the heroic trait, the artifact, and something like really specific to me. I love the idea of Prince Vordry as well. I've actually been running a lot of armies these days with one or two unique Warmaster heroes, like unique or Warmaster, whatever. Yeah. I'll run two of them. Like my Stormcast is Indrasa and Krondus. Why? Because then my heroic trait will still go to that little support hero, the Knight Vexilor, or I'll run Marathi, and I'm not giving away that because I can put the ability on the Hag Queen. Same is true here. I just put that trait on the support hero, whatever it might be.
Yeah, if you're bringing a Necromancer, I totally agree. I think Disadvantage only comes in if you want to seriously talk 2-drop, or if you're really getting worried about some points somewhere else. But I think you're right. I again agree. The 80-point increase on the Prince is justified because I think he is a lot better.
If you don't have the points, the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon is still very good. If I've got the points, I'm going Vordry over Vampire Lord, unless there's a really good argument that you've got in your build where the Vamp Lord is better and is giving you that extra unit that lets you do that extra battle tactic.
Yep, totally.
Still a good choice. It's just Vordry right now. It's just hot. Like it's just
the reliability of his
good
damage and his spell is just, it's very tough to argue against for sure.
Yeah, especially when you're playing with the Strike Last and Strike First. When you can start playing around with Quick Blood and Dark Mist and all the other things.
Yeah.
So
should we tag back to Torgilius real quick?
Yeah, we can. Well, what other units? Like, is there anything? I mean, because Torgilius, I think, is pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.
Like people are tapping into. Like, we'll go to Torgilius.
The Necromancer, just in case people haven't looked at it yet.
Don't make me jump. I'm on Torgilius. Don't like this document is so hard to move around.
Yeah, right. It is.
I'm on Torgilius. I found it.
Let's do it.
Give me the high level. Just tell me.
So the Trusted Lieutenant ability, double Deathly Invocation, really works in a lot of builds. I think if you're bringing Belladama, you should absolutely bring Torgilius. I know it's a decent points investment, but those two paired together really work in a certain type of build where you're trying to run a bunch of dogs, a bunch of that Deadwalker build or Death Rattle build. I think naturally with the Killing Moon spell on Belladama, it lends itself a lot more to a Deadwalker build of dogs and stuff. The reason I don't like this, my biggest hang-up with bringing that build is the beast keyword. And if you're not getting that Killing Moon spell off, it can be very difficult to score objectives. When you're paying 140 points for a unit that only has a 1 objective control ability. So then what you're focused on is drowning and body blocking. Well, skeletons are really good with that. Torgilius holding a flank, recurring a bunch of skeleton units with Deathly Invocation, Neferata going up the other flank, Killing Moon spell, and recurring with Deathly Invocation on a bunch of dogs. Something to look at. Is it maybe my style play? No. But if you want to try and drown your opponent with bodies, I think these, and you feel like just that, evil vampire laughing as hordes of scary zombies or monsters or dogs are going forward. This is the way to do that build at the core combo here. And it's only 1 regiment. So that's always a plus. Just these two together. So that alone, Torgilius is a big price tag, but being able to consolidate them into 1 battalion, quite handy indeed.
What other units would you call out? Let's say three more units, and if you don't pick one of mine, I'll intercept and I'm going to chuck one in as well. Yeah.
So let's do skeletons, the Death Rattle skeletons.
Skeletons.
I was not as big of a skeleton fan for a while in 3rd edition. I think I thought they got priced too high, and I just thought that we're going by a bunch of the other units too. That's too funny.
Keep talking. Like this is so hard to find this document.
I think one of the greatest tools they have is being able to deploy into the grave, pop up next to terrain pieces, score, or most of the terrain's going to be close to objectives. That's getting you on objectives. Because it's 10 models with the banner, that's 11 of them. And right there, that ended any turn, Skeleton Legions, putting D3 of them back. That is fantastic recursion. That's not putting in a rally. That's not putting Deathly Invocation on them. Again, like we talked about earlier, 4th edition, I really think rewards units that buff themselves. This unit, skeletons aren't killing anything. So what are they here for? They're here to get you points. And getting you points, that rule helps you get points with them. With so many units in this book having not fantastic objective control, I would say that can be one of the weaknesses of the book and sometimes some of the builds. This is a good, reliable unit that, unless you really put resources into it, can be surprisingly hard to remove for a lot of opponents. And their ability to recur, combined with if you get a hero nearby them with Deathly Invocation, can really make it frustrating. Your opponent might underestimate the damage that they can put into them. So that can be really critical.
You've got to commit, because like you look at it, a 5-up save, 6-up ward, who cares? It's 10 wounds, right? Like it's nothing. If you don't commit properly, you will chip. And this is always the big thing, right? When people don't commit against death in general, they always get punished, because there's always that 1 or 2 wounds that survives. Then the regrowth starts happening. Then you've got to waste another combat, or you're tied in combat. So you're right. If someone fully commits, I don't know, a really powerful unit into remove skeletons, you won, because that powerful unit hasn't gone into the Vampire Lord or the the Blood Knights or whatever. On the flip side, you've kept a bunch of skellies around, and then they're going to start coming back from Deathly Invocation, through Skeleton Legion, from blah, 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 and it'll be a distraction later in the game.
Yep, absolutely. And when it recycles too, that banner, having a recursion unit that pops up, and with the banner on now as objective control 6, that can be huge too. There's lots of characters and monsters that are 5, and all of a sudden you, boop, nope, I took it. So that is a great little tool. I really like that. Another great, cheap little objective scoring unit that just does what you usually ask it to, in my opinion, are the Felbats. I love that they're 90 points. I like these way more than I like the dogs, for a couple reasons. One, they're kind of like a slot machine on damage output. If you are throwing them into little back hero characters chilling around, or if something goes I got a wild story at Old Town. I had a scary moment where Brute Ragers countercharged, made like a 10-inch charge and caught them. And here I am thinking, oh no, this is the end. I'm going to drop this battle tactic. Brute Rager missed all of his attacks. The bats turned around and killed 2 of the Ragers.
Was that Aaron? Did you play Aaron?
No, it wasn't Aaron. But what a swing. And dogs aren't going to do that. And it's that damage 2. That damage 2 is kind of surprising. And you can slingshot them. Being able to retreat and not take damage and retreat and charge is a pretty nasty little tool, where you can kind of chain move them really fast across the backfield. If you go up the flanks and swing by and peel onto objective, and you've got a little 3-wound wizard over there, all of a sudden that wizard's kind of freaking out. And they nibble on him. And there you go. You removed a threat and picked up an objective. They're only control 1. So they're not, they like being away from the fights. They're not going to grind it out on objective, but they're decent body blockers. They can, one thing I really like to them, the fly keyword helps you get where you need to go. So for all those reasons, I really like bats. They're priced really well. The recursion's great. It's another little unit where I don't have to put resources into it. I'm going to get a couple battle tactics off of these guys, and if they do anything else, that's gravy.
I'd take 2 units. I would take 2 units for that exact reason. Seize the center, take the flanks, take their lands. It means that every other unit that I have can go into combat or other objectives. And I know for a fact, turn 1, seize the center. Turn 2, I could go take the flank, or take the flank and then come into play. Go take the flank, and then if they get ignored, I can then start going for take their lands, or going into a backfield objective. If I've got Scorched Earth. There's also
the death battle tactic, where they just hang out in the backfield corners too. There's so many of those battle tactics they just excel at.
180 points frees you up for every other battle tactic. So then you don't have to, because if you don't have 2 of these units, then who does take the flank? I don't want to be putting skeletons over onto the flank. They're too slow, and it's going to take them forever to get back into it. I don't want to put my Blood Knights on the flanks, or my Black Knights on the flanks. This is just self-contained. If they die, so what? If they live, they're going to annoy the crap out of your opponent.
Well, and if they die, when you go to recycle them, put them by somewhere in a terrain piece where your opponent's not, and now they're back on the field again doing stuff, and your opponent really has to spend resources to go chase them. So that I just think they're one of the best point efficient units that really help out Soulblight and frees them up, like you said, to have your units doing the fighting. So nice.
All right, you got one more unit, and then if you don't say my one, I'm going to bring one up.
Okay, let's see. I think I'm going to go. I've talked about the Grave Guard enough.
I think everyone knows what Grave Guard does.
So I'm gonna go Black Knights.
All right. I'm glad that you said Black Knights. By the way, Necromancer, so good. Van Hell's amazing. Necromancer does Necromancer things. Like, it's just good.
It is great. In my opinion, auto combo trotting around behind the Grave Guard. So let's talk Black Knights. Black Knights are, in my opinion, the auto pick unit for General's Regiment and the Honor Guard for getting the +1 to hit and wound. It is so strong on a unit of 10 of these guys. When they're doing a charge, they just roll through things. And the other great trick for Black Knights, where even if you don't necessarily, or after you get one charge off, you don't quite finish something off, you probably can grind it out and win. But if they get hit with something else, there's a lot of durability in this unit between the recursion opportunities from Deathly Invocation and potential debuffs, right? If Neferata, who can keep up with them, is coming up, putting Dark Mist on them, making them -1 to hit bubble as she gets into the fight with them. There's this unit is fantastic. Health 3, 4-up armor save with a 6-up rend is incredible, or 6-up ward is incredibly durable for sure. I love the crit mortal ability when they come charging in with the +1 damage. So now, I mean, we all know what cavalry is on the charge. It's mean. It's also one of the units in Soulblight that is not a hero, that is fast. And that is always a plus. Soulblight definitely, when you get into the Death Rattle units and Deadwalker units, can really feel like you're kind of stuck either babysitting slower units or you're strung out. And so, and it's a nice big footprint. Big footprints are really important in AoS that can move fast by blocking channels through terrain, covering objectives, pushing out exclusionary zones, blocking movement. That's very important. So for all those reasons, I just think Black Knights are a win for sure.
I actually prefer, I'm going to maybe say something controversial. I like Black Knights more than Blood Knights.
Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah. In 3rd edition, when there was a wound difference, I think Blood Knights really had its spot, right? 3 wounds versus 2 wounds in Black Knights. Now that Black Knights are 3 wounds and most cavalry got an extra wound, but Blood Knights didn't. I don't know why, and maybe this is too overpowered. Maybe they tested it, it didn't quite work. I don't see why Blood Knights can't have 4 wounds like a Chaos Knight. It feels like Chaos Knights and Blood Knights should be on 4 wounds. Yes, you've got, healing abilities in vampires. I get it. But like when I think about the absolute elite of cavalry, those two are the elites. Yeah. When I look at the price difference of Blood Knights versus Black Knights and the synergistic things around Death Rattle, Black Knights is what stands out because pound for pound, they're what's that? 70 currently at the time of recording, it's a 70-point difference. If I reinforce it, that's 140 points. I get more benefits through tapping into Death Rattle, and we've just looked at Mortarchs and other abilities that are Dead Walkers or Death Rattle. So I'm getting more buffs, more synergy, more boosts that Blood Knights aren't giving me for cheaper.
It's tough to not make it an obvious choice. It's such a bummer.
Oh, sorry. Blood Knights have a 3-up save though, right? So
Blood Knights do have a 3-up save. And I totally agree with you. To me, it's obscene with Chaos Cavalry. Especially, I'll tell you what, Mark and Nurgle, Brigade 10 Chaos Knights that are Nurgle, enjoy chewing through that.
Or corn, like
the corn damage output is insane too.
+1 attack or -1 to wound. I look at that and I go, why can't Blood Knights have 4 wounds?
Yeah,
that to me is like the barrier to me. But who am I?
It is
what do I know?
Interesting to see some of the rules they took away from both of them, especially with kind of the damage output on the charge for Black Knights on the mortal wound ability. Blood Knights lost kind of the running over thing a bit. That those are kind of bummers to see go. But I think the price point on Black Knights is really good. I would say if we're going to see points go up on any unit in Soulblight, I would guess it's this one. But I would, not be hugely surprised.
I think most cavalry will probably go up some
Yeah.
points. If Games Workshop's listening to this, my one call is to make Blood Knights even better. Make them 4 wounds.
Right.
But if you're worried about balance, then make them unreinforceable. You've seen this across, like the True Blades. You can't reinforce them. Cool. Make Blood Knights like super powerful. Five wounds. Make them tanky and killy as all hell, but you can't reinforce them. And
Totally
then
reasonable.
I'd be cool with that.
Yep, for sure.
All right. Well, I'm going to pick one unit, and then we're going to go to your lists. Now, I'm finding it real tough to pick which one, right? Because I think this is the time for the Bloodseeker Palanquin, the Mortis Engine, and the Coven Throne. I think for people who have wanted these Wizard Chariots or Vampire Chariots, this is a good time to revisit this unit because there's a lot of play and a lot of versatility and some cool rules that they bring. I just don't know which one I'd pick because all 3 of them bring different things to the party that I like.
To me, I think the most first apparent combo would be maybe based off of what other Mortarch I would want to bring. To me, the Coven Throne and Manfred seem like a delightful combo with their tactical abilities. Again, I see this working really well with that Graveguard combo. So the Coven Throne with the tactical insight ward buff is really making those Graveguard nasty if we lose our Necromancer. Or he can roll around with the Black Knights and keep those guys really nasty defensively and keep them around longer. The Scrying Pool, again, pairs really well with Manfred's ability. Now you're double piling in. That is nasty. That if you're piling in Manfred and a unit of Graveguard or Manfred and a Coven Throne, I mean, that you are wrecking your opponents. They will let you do that one time and never again.
You'll be buying drinks for your opponent after every game. Like save some of your dollary dues because you owe your opponent a drink every time you do this.
That is a combo that you want to make sure you try to explain to them at the beginning of the game. You're like, what's your list do? Don't be the guy that doesn't say that. Be like, hey, man, just a heads up. This will really suck if you let me do it.
Oh, it's so true. Like the Coven Throne is really good, but then I look at the Mortis Engine. I'm like, yeah, I like this too. Like I like this. And then I look at the Palanquin. I'm like, you know what? It's been a long time that I haven't seen a Palanquin for a long time outside of the old. What was Prince Vordry's old sub-faction? I've forgotten the.
Yeah, I've forgotten all those names too. I'm the worst. I'm the worst at the name of the lore names of those.
But the +1 attack, like giving 3 vampire units +1 attack, like, okay, I want to run Blood Knights. I want to run Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon. I want to run Prince Vordry. I just run this absolute vampire focus. Even your True Blades, +1 attack being within 12 inches. Like, sign me up.
Yeah. I think these war engines are great. I think the only thing to be wary of them is they really are a substantial step down in durability from the Mortarchs and the bigger heroes. And it can be easy to forget that. And I'm not saying that they're not worth taking, but the defensive durability of like, oh, I got the hunger and all this stuff. There's a huge difference between 12 wounds and 16 wounds, a 4-up save and a 3-up save. And if we're not careful when we manage these resources, they can go away really quick. And, unlike our Black Knights and whatever, we're not getting them back. So
counter argument, they're like half the price. Like you look at the
totally. Yeah. I'm not saying that they're not worth taking for that, but it is.
You are right.
I can catch myself getting into moments where I overestimate things survivability. I'm like, I got the hunger. I got these things. Like there's enough strike first and last. I'll be okay here. And I have misjudged where my opponent with 3-inch combat range, right? That was one thing I had to get used to of like, hey, my opponent's going to really be able to put all their attacks almost always where they want if I'm in combat with them. And getting used to that switch has caught me off guard a couple times with the units. I lost the Necromancer not paying attention to that one time on a pile. And I'm like, whatever, he's 1-inch reach. And then it's like, okay, I got 6 guys within 3 inches of that. I'm like, oh snap, that's right. And so silly things like that, just as depending on how much games you're getting to play. If you're not playing very many games, like, it can be really easy to not pay attention to something like that.
I think the big challenge is going to be just the fact that you've got, you're on mute, by the way, just in case you just give me like some kind of weird hand signal to tell me that it's all sorted. But one of the big challenges you've got is that this is going to be high drop army. I think that's the challenge, right? If you're going to have, multiple heroes, the Bloodseeker Palanquin is going to be a hero. So 250 plus a Mortarch, maybe 2 or maybe two superheroes. It's going to be hard to be low drops with something like this. So keep that in mind. How are we going? Fire alarm still going? It's still going. All right, cool. So with our favorite units chosen, I'm gonna go to the lists. I might pause for a second, folks, just if I look weird, and then we'll resume with the fire alarms fixed. All right, folks, we're back from the fire alarm, and Ben has actually just gone out and saved some kittens that were in a tree. And what else? There was like you got people's precious memories, and we moved them out of the building. So we're all safe now, and now we can move to the fire. That is going to be some of the lists we're going to talk about. This is straight fire. So we're going to go through this really quickly because I know Ben's also got some delicious dinner coming up. First one being your Old Town Throwdown list. So the evolution, and we got 4-1 on this one. You got your Backdrall of Blood. It's 1980, 3 drops. No surprise, Morbid Conjuration is sitting there as our endless spell manifestation lore. It's just too good right now. I'm sure that will change hopefully in the near future, but right now, Lore of Death, supported by death. You have Neferata with a reinforced unit of Black Knights. You've got a reinforced unit of Grey Guard, both in the General's Regiment. Regiment 2 has a Necromancer, 2 units of Skellies. You have Regiment 3, which is your Vlozda, your Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon with the Orb of Enchantment, and Unhinged Rampager for the reroll charge, 2 units of Fellbats. How does this list work, given that we have probably talked a lot about these types of units, so we probably connected the dots already, but what's the theme behind all this?
Yeah, so the theme behind this list is creating pressures for your opponent to react to, while skeletons and bats get you points. You're wanting the dragon and the Black Knights can kind of be their own operators, and Neferata is kind of going to pick where her spell buff is going of Dark Mist, either on the dragon, the knights, or the Graveguard in front of her. Graveguard, kind of crescent moon in front of Neff with a Necromancer, and kind of push up the middle to kind of do an area denial aspect and force your opponent to either come in and deal with them or push out and go. And then your Zombie Dragon and Black Knights kind of pick chips in the flank and smash into those points to create disruption. Again, you're kind of just forcing your opponent on the game plan. They're either deploying defensively to stop your silent grave units from coming out with the skeletons and the bats scoring you points. It's hard for them to be in a good position to stop those and be in a good position to catch the Black Knights and the dragon creating pressures. This list kind of roll punches. Like, the Black Knights are usually the first thing I push in there because they're going to have the recursion opportunity, and they have Deathly Invocation and things like that. I try not to throw the Zombie Dragon away too early. If I do that, it's usually a misplay, and I regret it later. And so it's more of like kind of a linebacker thing for American football, where you're just kind of defensively waiting, and your opponent is so afraid of it that they push away and stay away, and you can kind of control the board without them ever getting into it. When they kind of push themselves into a corner, then you can strike. So that's more or less how the list works. And that's just ring around the edges, getting points. Skeletons just recur where they need to and sometimes get in the way of stuff. And yeah, you just try to pick when you get to control the fights and either dare your opponent to try and crack the nut or punish them when they don't deal with it soon enough.
I always put either, actually, I can't say I always and give you 2 options. I will either put the Vampire Lord and the Zombie Dragon smack bang in the middle, because then it swings wherever I need it to swing. Or alternatively, I deploy my army and then put it on a flank. And then, because most people don't put a good offensive unit on the flank, unless you've got something like Stormcast Dragons or something that goes hunt things down, you put that on the flank, it will eat anything that it comes into and then like you just kind of compress in or come from the back or hit them from the side.
That's
So
exactly right.
yeah, it's a wonderful psychological piece and definitely worth, we talked about the benefits of Vordry. Well, here's an example where this comes into play and it makes a lot of sense to have a Vlozda.
Yeah, I think you need either, if you swapped him in, you'd be losing a skeleton unit or Fellbat unit, and I would rather give up the skeleton unit first. But this list really, I think, does need both skeleton units, especially, at Old Town Throwdown, 5 of the 6 missions had 6 objectives. And I think most of the objectives in this handbook are 6. That's the most common, at 5 to 6. And you just need those units that you can ask, hey, just be here for 2 or 3 turns, get me the points you can. And, losing those can be really difficult for sure.
Yeah, agreed. I wholeheartedly agree. I think, I see the argument with the Vlozda here. You could do Prince Vordry, but you're right. Giving up a unit of Death Rattle Skellies or a Fellbat just puts the pressure on your battle tactics, which I'm not sure I'd be willing to give away just at this point in time.
Yeah.
Unless you knew your battle plans in advance and you knew they were like 3 to 5 and you were mostly fighting in the center, then yeah, sure, I would do that. But I've seen too many people get caught out with, what's it called? Even like Star Strike. Like, okay, where do I go? I need choices. Speaking of choices, let's flip it to second option. So kind of a lot of commonality with the first one, but we've gone in with Manfred and the unit of Black Knights. So still a backnull of blood, getting us the +1 to casting or +1 to wound, depending on if I'm in combat or not. You've got your Coven Throne with Unbending Will, Orb of Enchantment, so same loadout. Some Skellies, 2 units of unreinforced Skellies, a unit of Graveguard that has been reinforced. You've got a Necro, another unit of Black Knights, and 2 units of Fellbat. So how does this one differ to what we just spoke about? Like, what's the strengths or the weaknesses or the differences?
We're really trying to take advantage of all the tools we have that buff Death Rattle and get the most out of Death Rattle. So again, we're asking our little Fellbats to go off to the sides. Black Knights can also be a little surprise flank unit that can roll up the side. They're cheap enough that we don't mind giving them away for a turn to go do something like take the flank. And it also gets them in a good position to kind of sweep mid to late game, kind of like we were asking our Dragon to do at a much, obviously, lower threat level. But this one, again, now you have the Black Knight Brick combined with Manfred as 2 big threats. I see Manfred and the Throne rolling with this Graveguard block, as this is our center control thing, pushing up the middle of, if you come too close to me and mistime this, I'm going to pile into you and all bets are off and you're really going to have a bad time. And again, you've got your Death Rattle going around, picking up objectives for you, or being able to spawn back on your home objectives to where if your opponents somehow have their deep striking abilities or whatever, Death Rattle, great units for that. And we've got this Black Knight unit that's kind of more of our scalpel hammer, moving faster than this brick that's kind of moving up the board. Here you can make some arguments to make some swaps on potentially some of the traits like we talked about of extra movement in the early game or something like that. Instead of Orb, like Lash of the Sire, make some swaps in around that. You'll notice these lists have a lot of overlapping choices just because I'm very comfortable with these units. I know what I asked them to do. They fit into my play style. It's about kind of finding different lists in the play style I like. You've got to figure out what your kind of play style is and what brings, what sparks joy for you in that sense. So, but this one just approaches it in a different way, really focusing in on that Death Rattle combos, trying Manfred instead of Neferata to be more of that combat tech piece instead of a defensive tech piece. So again, and trying out that fun, using those Coven Thrones that, and pieces like that we really haven't gotten to see in years. I mean, I couldn't tell you the last time I saw one of those on the table.
It's been a while. I think my only change, if I was running this list personally, is I'd probably swap out the Artifact with Lash. I think giving the
easy,
Skellies or the Graveguard the extra move or the pile in, and then you combine it with the redeploy stuff. But again, it's up for choice. I mean, you could even do no, sorry, not artifact. Yeah. Sorry, trait. I'm talking command trait. Sorry, swapping out Unbending Will for Lash. I think is probably the only thing I would probably change.
Yeah, easy.
It's personal preference.
Yeah.
The last one is a doggo list. Shout out to the dogs. Mine literally just walked out to go get some lunch. We've gone Death Stench Drove. You've got Regiment 1, which is Manfred and Black Knights reinforced, Graveguards reinforced. By the way, shout out to anyone who recognized I misspelt Manfred on the title of the last list. So I quickly fixed it up in the meantime. But you've got Manfred, Black Knights and Graveguard in his regiment reinforced, both of them. You've gone Belladama with 2 units of Dire Wolves and Torgilius. Then you've got Regiment 3, which is Necro with the Lash and the Orb and a unit of Fellbats. So this is a much different play style.
Yeah.
What's the TRDL?
Honestly, there's probably some tweaking and choices that could be made here. We're not maximizing Killing Moon with this one, unfortunately. It's kind of this trap between getting the most heroes and tools in here and damage units like the Graveguard and Black Knights while still having kind of defensive buffs. This is a similar take on Tom Guan's list that he was running, and I was trying to make. This is maybe the beginning of experiments of my version of what it would look like. I might like to see more dogs in it, to be honest, but the hang up I always have is, again, with the Death Stench Drove, is you're not doing the +1 to cast, and I just really think Bell needs that. So I might swap that and go back. I was just trying to not write the same list 3 different ways, to be honest.
I did challenge you a little bit. I'm like, let's just not always focus on Neffy and Manny. But you're right. Like if you're going to go into Deathwalker, I find it hard to justify having both the Black Knights and the Graveguards where there could be more dead, like more zombies and more dead walkers. And I think you've got to make the trade, because otherwise, you're right. This probably is just better off being the +1 to cast, +1 to the This is better off. Like you've got to go much harder into your dead walkers to.
So this might
really
be an example of the list not to write, because this is trying to do too many things at the same time. If we're being fully honest, there's, you might see a cutting even potentially of Manfred to bring in something like the Prince for a hammer, and then cutting the Graveguard in favor of more dogs, or maybe a dog and a bat unit. And you have the Black Knights, the Prince, rounded out there. There's also maybe opportunities to try and cram this into 2 drops. I think you lose a hammer that you'll need. I was
just thinking that. I was just thinking like that Necro and the Fellbats, like if I'm really going hard onto Death Stench and I need to get those doggos, those zombies, those, like, do I need to bring in what's his face, Gorslav? Like, is Gorslav someone that I need to start bringing in, right?
Yeah, I haven't found a zombie list that I really like yet. I really would love them to work because I have too many of them sitting on my shelf. But I've still got a lot of dogs instead. And I think if you're going to try and make a dog bat list work, that is where you focus on with the Belladama and getting that spell off. If I was to write this list again, might swap Manfred for the Prince, cut the Graveguard, try and get more dogs and bats in. I'd probably still leave the Black Knights. I think when we have that speed of the dogs, again, we bring back our Black Knights, let the dogs go up first that are buffed. They're going to recycle. You let your opponent slam into the dogs, grind them out, and either get stuck or kill them. And then our Black Knights are slamming into the threat that lifted the dogs. You're trying to use the dogs to control the trades when they happen. You'll do the same thing with the Prince. And then the dogs come back and keep defensive around Belladama. And having more of them than just 2 will really help you out in this list and get much more out of it. So I might swap the Death Stench off to it. So again, I guess this is maybe the caution of don't fall into the trick of trying to be jack of all trades, master of none. Soulblight rewards you for leaning into a build and a strategy. you can build as many different lists as you want, but don't get caught maybe trying to do them all at the same time.
Yeah, or don't invest as many points. Like have like that 300, 400 side piece that does something else. But you've got and that's the tough thing, right? Like Soulblight again has so many great units. It's do you double down on the Dead Walker and just go all in? Because I mentioned Gorslav, bringing the Corpse Cart, bringing in so many things, or do you diversify? And there's probably pros and cons, but to get the most out of Soulblight, especially some of these heroes that you're paying a premium for, you probably want to focus a good 70% of your points into a play style, a build, a keyword. Something that is going to make the most of one of your abilities, because you can't tap into vampire stuff and Deadwalker stuff and Death Rattle stuff, and because you'd just be a mixed bag.
That is one of the traps I think that can happen. It's such a big, good book with good internal balance. You can easily get stuck trying to, grab too many things off the buffet line, and you don't finish your plate or whatever, right? You miss out on opportunities. So don't fill up on bread, right?
Don't fill up on bread. What a great way to kind of wrap that up. It's a lesson that I learned with Gits, right? Because you got trolls, you got spiders, you got squigs, you've got grots, and you got all these great choices. And you got a gargant. Like, what do I bring? And like, you start circling. It's like, actually, what I'm best off doing is getting the internal synergies. And what makes my army really good is getting those things that improve things by 10 or 20%, and then collectively across all of the units I've gotten way more value. So, but again, like I'm not saying don't run the army that you want to run, but if you're thinking about making the most of it and you want to run Nagash, or like, we haven't talked about Lukovai, we haven't talked about Sekar, the new snake vampire lady. Like, if you love Sekar and you put a lot of effort into it, go do it, but try to find the internal synergies and make the most of it.
Totally.
Do you.
Absolutely.
Last question. Soulblight Gravelords Battle Tome comes. What's the one thing that you want to see in the Battle Tome? And that's an open question. Is it a unit? Right. Is it a thing? Like what's the one thing? And feel free, people, if you want to chuck it into the comment section as well. But what's the one thing that Soulblight Gravelords adds to that Battle Tome?
It would be really cool to see a branch of the vampires and maybe a wing of them expanded. Like, they did a really good job of fleshing out Viracos. I would like to see them do that more with maybe something like Kato and his background. There's a bunch of guys that are like maybe ex-Chaos that have been turned into vampires that maybe don't really dig on Nagash. Maybe there's still a little bit of Chaos influence on them, and they're still Soulblight, but they got some beef and they're trying to be off on their own a little bit more even than normal vampires. Or they super hate Chaos and they're grateful for Nagash for freeing them. So they go hunt very specifically against Chaos or something like that. And you have some cool, unique units. It'd be cool to see more vampire units besides just heroes. Like a unit of vampire infantry that are more like chosen, right, for Chaos or something like that. That could be kind of cool and different, something gnarly like that.
I don't actually know. Like, I'm looking at your pitch battle profile, right? And you've got a lot of great hero choices. And I don't know if there's many more heroes that I'd want to add to.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I don't feel like there's a gap. When I look at your unit selection, right, they've obviously done a lot of good work to flesh out the monsters through the Viercross, the Avangori. Family, right?
Yeah.
Like they've done a good job there. You've added some extra vampires through like the True Blades and the Bloodborne and stuff like that, right? There's some good choices. I actually don't know. Like, I wonder if anything, it's maybe more of the zombie and the skeleton side. And I don't know if this is old school me, where I miss like the skeleton archers, the skeleton chariots. Like my history goes back to like 3rd edition fantasy battles, where there used to be skeleton chariots.
Yep.
There used to be skeleton archers, or like, was there archers? There was archers. There was archers. There was a screaming skull catapult. There was the black coach, which has a vampire in it. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm just fixed to the old way of like vampire counts, but I'd love to see more skeleton. Give me more skeleton.
Skeletons,
All right, I'm gonna be really controversial here. You ready for this one?
Yeah.
Bone Giant. Bone Mega Giant.
Yeah, Bone Mega or Zombie Giant. Fleshing out more zombie options, like that would be cool. Like zombie orcs, or
zombie Leviathan turtle.
Yeah, now you're
zombie.
talking.
That's probably the one thing that I've really annoyed me. Right, like what would get me playing is like there are so many fantastical creatures in the mortal realms.
Yeah,
give me a zombie version. Give me zombie Star Drake. Give me zombie, like any insert monster here. Surely there is a skeleton or a zombie version. Or if you want to go even harder, what about all the creatures that have been through the age of myth or the age of chaos that is no longer in existence, like we've seen with the Terrorgeist? Where is the next version of the Terrorgeist? Because that's a creature that was to be just like a big bat from whatever the realm. Give me another one. Give me something from the sea.
Cool.
Give me something IDK, like some undead IDK.
You've seen from Warhammer Total War, the Leviathan crab monster. Give us a big zombie skeleton undead hermit crab. Games Workshop. Give us that model. Don't give it to Old World. Give it to us.
Well, we've seen the Tomb Kings have got their new skeleton.
Yeah, they got the crocodile dragon. Yeah.
I think I'd like to see more skeleton or more zombie, and then I don't know.
That could be fun. That could be fun
because that might actually round out the monster focus and it less about, because again, like when you've got a vampire on a zombie dragon, I never want to take a regular zombie dragon. So give me something as unique and special. But Ben, we have probably gone over time. Thanks for coming back after saving the kittens and saving all the things from the forest fire that you put out in that short period of time. But if people want to chat to you more, are you on the socials? Where can people chat to you?
Yeah, so I'm on X, just at Mr. Mortanks, or at Ben. Actually, I'm at Ben Schimmoller on.
Just send it to me.
I'll put it up. Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, X, and also on Discords. Several of them in the coaches Discord, and a couple others around. So always love to chat Warhammer, and there's plenty for me to learn for sure. I don't pretend to be an expert on anything, but just found a build and list and style I like to play with a super great battles, war scrolls and stuff like that. So it's how we get better, is talking out ideas. And if you can TTS or play with your friends, always try and do that.
High tide lifts all boats. That's literally the mantra of this channel. Is like getting people to share ideas, whether you agree with Ben or you disagree with Ben. At least you've had some critical thought and you've taken away an idea that maybe you hadn't thought about. Maybe you can explore. Maybe that third list that is not quite ready yet, put it back in the oven. Maybe you've got the keys to it and how you can make the most of Dead Walkers. I don't know, but that's why we do these discussions, and hopefully you learnt a few things. One final time, if people want to come to your event, when is it and where is it?
Yeah, thanks so much. It's in Bend, Oregon, September 14th and 15th. I'll make sure that we end up with the BCP link. I posted about it in the coach's Discord under events. We got a golden ticket from Games Workshop. Still time for you guys to come on down and check us out. Thanks so much.
Should be a great time, and go test some of these lists or see what Soulblight's all about. But Ben, thank you so much for your time. People, I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I hope you picked up a few things. And until this battle tome, who knows when it's coming? And who knows, maybe from the Nova Open, we'll see. Maybe there's been that rumor mill. There's been a rumor mill, and it looks very undeady. So maybe you're not far. Maybe you're not far off. I don't know. Legitimately. All right.
Cheers. Thanks, Coach. Really appreciate it.
Bye. Thanks for hanging around until the end. I hope you enjoyed that video and you walked away with a few new ideas. Now, if you did, I would love it if you pressed like on the video, as well as left me a comment with your thoughts. The conversation will continue over on Discord, and the link is down below in the episode description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the AoS Coach patrons and YouTube members who are supporting the channel and the growth that you're seeing here. So cheers, you are all bloody legends. And until next time, don't roll a 1-1 on a spellcast.